Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this Reuters webinar on customer experience. We'll just give it a couple of more seconds just to allow people to drift in, and then we'll kick it off. Now, before I introduce the wonderful panel of the speakers, I wanted to take a moment. What a great but vast topic we're going to be talking about today. Lots of opportunities, approaches, and things to discuss. And good and bad customer experience is something we're all familiar with, but in our work, it's a hugely important topic. The patient and HCP experiences and those moments of intersection are so crucial and have real world consequences. CX is built on a foundation of data and insights, the identification of audiences and design of patient and HCP journeys, and all fueled by quality, creative content targeted and delivered in omni-channel interactions. People and tech are what really make it happen. And it takes a village. It takes cross-functional team thinking and collaboration, medical strategy, omni-channel marketing and tech, partners, patient organizations, and especially the audience should all input into each moment of the customer experience. And thanks to Reuters for bringing the village together today and a panel who will share their personal perspectives and their wealth of experience. So today we've got Michelle Melker, Senior Director and Marketing Lead in Rare Disease at BioMarin, Levi Reyes, SVP of Scientific Services, HCP Engagement and Patient Centricity at HCG, Mary Andrews, Senior Director, Global CX Capabilities and Operations at Viv Healthcare, and Takeda's Head of Oncology and VP of US Medical Affairs, Abner Labau, MD. And I'm Dimitri, SVP of Digital Comms Strategy at HCG. In the run-up to today, we received a number of questions on CX approaches, audience expectations, omnichannel targeting strategies, and a lot on the digital transformation we find ourselves in with AI's impact on trust, and it raises questions around pharma's responsibilities. And thank you for those. Please keep them coming in the chat, and we'll try and cover as much as possible in 3 sections. First, we'll talk about what is currently happening now in CX and what we're trying to do and some of our kind of success stories. Secondly, we'll talk about what's next, where CX is going with the audience expectations and the AI tech transformation. And lastly, to really improve CX, the patient and HCP journeys, what do we have to do structurally or even philosophically to make this happen in our organizations? So let's get talking about what's going on now in CX, what's working for you. And Michelle, if I could start with you, what would you say are kind of 3 key elements of a good customer experience? And how do you apply that to your work and some of the things that you're focusing on?
Thank you. Super happy to join you today. Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think being really community focused and holistic in terms of what CX has to look like and having a really flexible way of delivering it. So it's not just a digital format, but also the incorporation of field or other resources, as you mentioned, something that's really cross-functional. And then, of course, data informed, right? So that we're making decisions that we can be nimble upon and really meet the customer where they are, be it the HCP or patient, and be as flexible as we can with it.
Yeah, I think that flexibility and the data is something that we'll talk about in a moment as well. But for you, Abner, is that kind of similar in the oncology space? And does it kind of differ for you, or is there kind of nuances?
Well, thank you, Dimitri, and thank you again for the invitation. First of all, I have to say that this is my personal opinion. Of course, I'm not representing Takeda here. It's most importantly to say this beforehand. I think yes, it's pretty much what Michelle said, but we would never lose the perspective. We will never have to lose this perspective that we're working essentially for patients, and by working for patients, we are working with doctors that make decisions, HCPs in general. And doing this, it's not a sprint; it's a marathon. We've been doing this for many, many years. I've been more than 20 years in the industry. We started without getting any sort of information. Then we kind of evolved to spreadsheets, and then from spreadsheets, we've get more and more sophisticated. And now we have all the tools available for us Companies are in different moments on their journey, and it's important to understand how can you use better technology without losing sight of the human factor.
Yeah, and so kind of which channels are you finding that tech is helping you, with you the most?
Well, essentially, in the past, we are in a one-on-one kind of relationship, either through MSLs or through Salesforce. Now, what we see is that we are going beyond that. And as Michelle said, we have to go to the community. Essentially, in the past, we were connecting with academic centers, while today the community is so important. But these are thousands and thousands of HCPs. It's impossible to go one-on-one with these guys. So there should be a personalization and a kind of a separation of your abilities to do this directly or through different channels. And then because it's available for us for some time now, the information on what are the preferred channels for every single individual, you can create a kind of an omni-channel that is really omni-channel, not just a fancy world, but something that will
Mm.
get to people where they are when they want to access the information and showing what's relevant for each one of them.
And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that kind of personalized aspect because that's something we're all interested in. And Mary, you've had a global role and it had even lived and worked in both the US and Europe. So that kind of contrast between the type of data you can get in those two places. And I was wondering if you could tell us, what are some of the ways that you have tried personalization strategies outside of the US, given all the GDPR challenges and that lack of data?
Yeah, I think you tend to, outside of the US, you need to really, really listen to what your customers are saying by their actions within the channels. And so you need to, it almost their engagement within the different channels becomes a little bit more critical to say, are you even reaching them in the right channels? And then you need to, what we tend to do is sometimes we do look to trends from the US to be like, okay, what is your data telling you when you see engagements like this? What's the impact? And try to kind of pull that across because you're not going to get that deep level of data that you'd love to have outside of the US. But so how can we use our insights from the US and draw some correlations between engagement? And then also I think looking at surveys and what does the third party data show us about what are the customers saying when they're talking to some third party vendors and using that to influence what does our channel mix look like and our frequency and things like that. So I do think you have to be, you can't just look internally, you need to look externally too, and just get the data from different sources to stitch it together to make the best story possible. And we still are in an era where we have field teams. So listening to your field teams and what are they hearing and making sure that there's a way to bring that information into your CRM and share it across different channels. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we try to stitch things together to get a robust picture to feel like we're confident in how we're showing up for our customers.
Yeah, I think that kind of the surveys can't be underestimated as to, that first-hand kind of feedback is so important. But what are some of the kind of other sources ex-US that you've kind of tapped into and when building that kind of HCP profile?
Yeah, so I think that we have a couple partners, and similar to Abner, I'm here to talk on my personal opinion versus on behalf of Vive. So, but we have found a couple of external partners that we've taken a look at what are they asking in their surveys, and do we think it's going to really give us a deeper level of insights to what we're gathering on our own. And so then we purchase data from them and then bring that data in and add it to our internal data to kind of, like I said, give us a more, what we think is a more well-rounded view. And we purchase things at country level. Like we want to make sure that if I'm talking to somebody in Portugal, that I am using insights that we've gained from Portugal and not insights that we've gained from the UK. And so that's, we try to be really specific and get it as granular as you can.
I saw you nodding along to that, Michelle. Is that something that you also have used, or what's your kind of localization strategy and the way you've used data?
Yeah, I think, surveys are obviously very important and critical, helpful insight because you can kind of understand at a local level what's happening as there are variations in the market. But equally, I'd say, for us, especially at a patient level, Abner, you mentioned in terms of service to patients, it's incredibly important, of course, in rare disease. And for us, we are often using patient advocacy groups to really understand what is that perspective, what are the needs of the community, so that we're really thinking about, what is it that supports families to be able to support them in managing difficult diseases. So I think it's trying to use all the stakeholders you can to kind of have a complete picture so the information you're putting out is relevant to your audience. And, that's all of, I think, everyone's goal.
Yeah, and how have you found integrating kind of third-party data or other platforms that you're using that exist outside of your ecosystem?
Yeah, but, a couple of different ways. I think depending upon the disease area, it depends what technology or platform works best. For us, we've implemented different things like patient apps, but for example, it's not an app to have an app for just to have it. It's really what is it that the community or that specific disease area needs to be able to support them either in their treatment journey with the product itself or in terms of diagnosis. So we've implemented a couple apps to support the product in terms of how patients are using it and for example, injection reminders, appointment reminders, things like this that we know the community has asked for. And then equally, thinking about how do we enable our websites to be more dynamic, we are working through implementing a digital front door, which is, really about servicing people as they come to our site. We know people's time is really precious and ensuring that they can find the content they need. So enabling a better search function that's AI enabled so that it's searching the content in our site, it's compliant with our requirements depending upon the market we're in, and then it can service information that's already been pre-approved, et cetera, but get people the answer they want to see faster and providing a better experience as people land on our websites.
And Dimitri, if I can add something here, from a US perspective, if you have enough resources, you can buy all sorts of information, or you can generate inside your own organization. So if you have a big team of MSLs, you generate thousands and thousands of insights directly from doctors, HCPs in general. You can buy surveys. As Michelle just said, we and other companies do advisory boards with HCPs, academic, community, patient advocacy, patients in general, digital opinion leaders. You can buy data related to what these digital opinion leaders are putting out there. You can have systems that will go through publications that are related to any given area that you're looking for. You can buy data on personalized medicine related to diagnosis for patients that have a kind of a mutation that you have a drug to work with. The problem is not getting information, at least now, at the moment that we're living. The problem is how you integrate all these things. Because you can spend all the money in the world, but every single person has a kind of a limited brain in a sense that is very difficult to digest and integrate and articulate all this information to make it something valuable for patients, of course, at the end, because eventually by knowing all these aspects and integrating all these aspects, for example, you can go to the right HCP when a rare diagnosis is coming to this doctor and then provide the right level of information so they can understand how to make the best therapeutic decision. But if you don't integrate these things, it will be just a piece of information lost in the whole system. And whenever you get to the information for any given reason, it will be eventually too late. Because in my case specifically, cancer does not wait for you. If you wait 1 month, 3 months, 3 months, it will be progressing, and then your ability to achieve cure or remission or anything else will be very limited. So what's the next step considering what we have today? If you have access to mostly everything, or at least the things that you need, it's how you integrate these things, which we can discuss later, and transform them into value for those external stakeholders and for the company itself.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's a really interesting point because so much of this you can get focused on those metrics or whatever, but it's about that kind of patient impact and how we move people along that adoption journey and develop them through that. Um, like Levi, I know you're kind of very focused on the kind of patient impact and the patient centricity. How do you kind of balance some of the things that we've heard so far and still think about that emotional connection and reaching people in that way?
Yeah, Dimitri, thanks for that. I think the short answer to the question is that if we're doing things right, then that emotional connection, it should just naturally come out for our customers. I realize, like, having said that, it's way easier said than done. I think it's important to kind of think about just our life in general and how we butt up against this problem all the time. We as people get the wrong information all the time. We get superfluous information all the time. And it's not insidious in nature, right? For example, like I tell this story to my teams and to our pharma partners all the time because just to reiterate how difficult this is. I was on vacation. I bought a nice jacket at a local store. There was nothing crazy about the jacket. I just liked it. And I got on their email list. I started getting bombarded by emails. I quickly unsubscribed. Right after that, I got a physical catalog. I mean, a physical catalog in 2025, and I was getting them every quarter is wild. And I don't know how to unsubscribe from this catalog. And now I'm wasting paper. I'm upset. And that led to an undesirable experience from my end. So this stuff happens all the time. It's very difficult. So it's critical for us, as other panelists mentioned, and alluded to many good points, that good customer experience, comes from that understanding of multiple data points. Many have already been mentioned. Where they practice, what type of institution they practice in. Are they in an integrated system? What's their patient load? And I think obviously what's most important, and Abner mentioned this, who are their patients? What are their barriers? And then when we understand that, that's where we can maintain that emotional connection that you were asking about.
Yeah, and I think that kind of frustration is so often we're trying to remove friction and make things smoother journeys, but also that frustration in all the different variations that it can take is really important to a good CX thing. I think now if you can just talk about like measurement for a moment. We're thinking about elevated patient care, right? But how do we measure that and really demonstrate it with customer engagement so it's not just kind of a rhetoric thing? Mary, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you need to, everybody's got to set a KPI, right? Like you have to have a goal of um, who are you reaching? How often are you reaching? And then what are they doing once you're reaching them? And you need to, I think there's different tools that you can use as you're measuring, because I think that it's really easy to look at, to keep it simple, an email open rate. And if you have a strong email open rate, you're like, success, we won, they all saw it. Well, if no one clicked on it and no one did anything with the email, it's then on us to really go back and challenge and say, okay, yeah, we have a good metric that we can all like maybe clap our hands about, but was it really the right content, right? Like if no one went further in the email, just because email is an easy channel to talk about, like, are we measuring the right thing? Are we really driving impact? And so are we getting the depth of engagement with our customers to where they're looking for more? Are we using the channels in the right way? So I think for me, it's being really focused on what actions matter and what actions can tell you that you're delivering the right content and at the right time. And so just kind of moving away from the simple engagement metrics, which 5 years ago were really important. Like getting someone to open an email 5 years ago was a sign of success. Today, it's no, are they coming to your website? Are they visiting multiple pages on your website? Or, how deep is that engagement? So I think It's about sitting down with your teams and your organization and being really clear about what do the different engagements actually tell you and where do you need to interrogate and what engagements really define success.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that level of sophistication that we can have now with the tools is really making for kind of more interesting metrics. And kind of with those journeys, we often have kind of talked about or think about how that journey is moving people to a face-to-face moment. And the
Mhm.
digital journey drives towards that meeting, that rep visit, the field teams, MSLs. And they're often kind of, like I've done this myself, see them as that personification of the brand, that human touch and empathy. How do you think their roles are kind of evolving in those kind of those journeys?
Yeah, I think the face-to-face moments are hugely important. And it's with all of our digital channels at our fingertips, it's on us to make sure that we're using the digital channels to really set all of those face-to-face engagements up to be even more impactful than they were in the past. So some of the things we look at is a message critical to get out, right? And so if it is, send it out in the digital channels and then give prompts to your field teams to then go in and follow up based on what those engagements look like. Like no longer do we put the pressure on our field force to be like, you are the first point of entry, you're the first one delivering the message. It's let's use our digital channels to bolster and to bridge the gaps between their engagements with their HCPs. And so I think it's more about using everything at our fingertips to build up those face-to-face engagements, which I think then releases some of the pressures on those on our field reps to feel like they're the one and only to do it all. Like I was a rep a million years ago and it was just me. We didn't have email. And so I'm like, reps now, like they just have, if we do our jobs right, those of us that are working in building the omni-channel experiences, we tee our field teams up to have much deeper and much more impactful engagements, which just at the end of the day serves the patients because you're getting the better information and the better dialogue. So yeah, hopefully that is what you're looking for.
Yeah, it does. And Abner, like a question has come in, and I'll try and reflect the way the caps have been used. But what do HCPs actually want from MSLs?
Wow, it depends. Give me a name. What's the name of the HCP? And I know this is a tricky question. Essentially, we don't know. Individually, we don't know if we don't leverage the tools that we have. So if you are an HCP and you are in a community, and then you receive a patient with a cancer, a type of cancer that is very rare, and it's addressable by a drug, there's target drug, and you have no clue because last time you look at it was years ago. And as a community oncologist, you see 20, 30 patients a day. Then what are you going to do? So what these guys need, this person needs quick access to relevant information, scientific, sound information, balanced information that will help this individual to make the right decision for the patient. Nobody want to be a doctor if not to do the right thing for the patients. So essentially, the desire of these HCP, it's exactly what is meaningful for this person at that time. Now, changing a little bit gears, the same person getting all sorts of information that is not related to a patient that they are seeing at this moment or that they see very frequently is not even um, a not good thing, but a very bad thing because it will steal time, mental time, physical time for seeing something or having a discussion that is not relevant. Having said that, if you understand exactly what is the need at that precise moment for the doctor, and you can get to with the right level of information to that doctor, that will be the best thing. And then it comes to the preference. If the preference is being face to face, you should be flexible enough to be there in 48 hours, 72 hours. If it's okay to meet on a Teams or a Zoom, let's go for it as soon as possible. If they rather have I don't know, a full article from JAMA or any other journal, make sure that this person will have access to it. If a summary is necessary, make sure that the summary is there. Always balanced and scientifically sound because it will give the confidence that you are providing the right level of information. So again, the answer is there's no one size fits all. And the more we try to do in a way that one size fits all, the more frustration we generate. And every single one in this call is, I'm pretty sure, look at the morning on their inbox. There's a lot of things that eventually will be interesting, but we delete every one of these things because it does not matter at this moment for us. Making sure that it matters is the most important thing.
Yeah, and I think that audience preference aspect and those changing styles of wanting less face to face, I think is really important. And I know last time when we spoke, Mary, you talked about such sort of digital first campaigns. Michelle, for you, in terms of the kind of rare disease area where things, there are less people there, you can be more personalized. What are some of the metrics that you're using for kind of deeper engagement or to measure that deeper engagement?
Yeah, for us, we're really looking to we're similar to what everyone said. We're not looking for this broad outreach, right? So ultimately, I think impressions are helpful, but really at the end of the day, it's did someone do something, as Mary mentioned. So for us, it's really about finding people who are actually interested in engaging with us. It leads to form fills or signing up for webinars and completion along those lines. Sometimes even going back to something that's a little more old school in terms of a telephone number and people reaching out or wanting to connect with us to actually find out more information from a person. So metrics along those lines, I think we're getting down to more of the personal level where people actually have the right intention. And in rare, you're not going to see huge numbers here, right? You're going to see very specific, targeted outreach. And so for us, often it's really coming down to very select events and running events with the community and being very specific in where we are. And that ends up being, very successful. And even though we obviously want to make sure people are aware that either disease aware, that's what we're working towards, making sure people understand this condition exists, or for maybe a slightly more prevalent areas, making sure we're getting to the very specific group that we're working through, and then coming down to this level of form fills, contacting someone or joining an event.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the intention and just really building engagement and success off action, I think, is really important here. So let's look forward a little bit at where CX is kind of going in the immediate future. And since AI entered the chat, we can produce more data, more content, and potentially more engagement. But how are we going to be able to keep up with that? It's something that you kind of mentioned earlier, Avner. But I also want to kind of discuss how we balance that innovation and responsibility, maintain that accuracy, privacy, and compliance. But I think like everything, it starts with the audience. And Levi, we were talking the other day about sort of patient and HCP attitudes to AI, and also some of the things that you learned at, I think it was the HRS conference, talking to cardiologists. Can you tell us a bit more about what you've found about the attitudes towards AI and its use?
Yeah. Thanks, Demi. So for the audience that may not know, HRS is the Heart Rhythm Society conference. Actually occurred a few months back, and like you mentioned, it targets cardiologists. So big topic there was atrial fibrillation. For those that might not know, it's a specific type of arrhythmia in the upper chamber of the heart. And we care about atrial fibrillation or AFib because when that happens, it's the perfect environment for a stroke to occur. And in fact, about 1 in 5 strokes, ischemic strokes, are due to atrial fibrillation. And so they talk about this all the time because it's a hard disease. Patients can go in and out of AFib, and they won't know, or the feeling will be fleeting. And so cardiologists used to be, back in the day, they'd give you this 24-hour EKG monitor. It's called a Holter monitor. It's like big, it's clunky, it's super obvious. And I think the most exciting thing they were talking about was the Apple Watch. Do you have an Apple Watch, Timmy?
I don't.
You don't? Okay. Maybe some of the panelists do. If you do, you should play with this function. You can actually you can actually track your EKG on it. And I was talking to one of these cardiologists, and he was telling me that he actually got into AI research because he had a patient who had an Apple Watch and sent him hundreds of EKG recordings. And he was like, what am I supposed to do with all this information? And so he began to use research AI with EKGs, and now there's a whole research base for this, and it's actually showing that AI can use these EKG readings from these smartwatches, and they're more accurate than these old devices, and they're now impacting the way doctors are talking to their patients about AFib and helping prevent strokes. There was some data that was showing how much more effective it was. So they're really excited about the actual application to medicine, but I also think it's important to remember that AI can make medicine better in indirect ways as well, right? There's actually a survey out of the UK that you might have seen, where GPs were asked about their use of generative AI in their clinical practice, and more than half of those cases, GPs reported that AI was used in non-medical tasks. So they were using them for generating documents, after patient visits and things like that. So I heard somewhere at that same conference that clinicians really do feel that AI will save time before it saves lives, which I thought was really fascinating. You see that adoption. But I know I'd be remiss without talking about patients though as well, because it's important as members of the healthcare industry that we need to appreciate how they feel about AI. I was reading a peer-reviewed paper just last year about patients who were surveyed and asked about, over the next 5 years, do they think AI will make an impact on healthcare in the US? More than half of those said that AI would make healthcare either somewhat better or much better. And so you're thinking to yourself, well, Levi, is that it's probably the younger generations feel better about it, older generations feel a different way. And no, when they segmented out the responses by age, didn't change. Everybody thinks it's going to be impactful. And they were also asked in that same survey, like, how important to you as a patient, if you are told how AI was used in how, if an AI program was used or played a role in your diagnosis or treatment. And so the patients responded that regardless if it was either a small role or a big role in their diagnosis or treatment, 80 to 90% of the patients thought it was important to be told. And so kind of rounding all of this out into my answer, I think it's super interesting because that tells me that there's a huge trust component here. And that trust needs to be transferred to kind of AI. Patients trust their doctors to make the best decision. And that includes, using AI. But we need to make sure that doctors understand that they need to be transparent, right? Because if they don't, they can't transfer that trust to the AI, and that might impact their ability to have those conversations or utilize that technology with their patients.
Yeah, I think that's really important, especially when and something I'm really interested in, I'm sure a lot of people are, is the kind of impact of the LLMs and these really intuitive interfaces and what that's having on the kind of patient and HCP journey and the way people are turning to them. But kind of, Mary, well, when I think we last spoke, you were talking about doing the easy thing and turning on tech, and it seemed like AI was taking you back to the sort of fundamentals in a way. But how is it affecting your work?
Yeah, I think you have to be pragmatic, right? I think there's so many AI tools out there for content, and we all want to jump on them and turn them on because we see other industries doing that. And I think in pharma, we live in a world where our content has to be approved before it goes out. And so I think that you have to be really pragmatic and make sure that before you just turn on the opportunity to make millions of pieces of content, you've got the structure in place for it to go through the review process so that it can actually see the light of day. Because anytime you have a new technology, and AI is way bigger than things we've seen in a while, you want people to be excited, you want people to use it. And so you need to make sure that when you first give them access and they start using it, they're able to be successful. Like if I were to just turn on all the things that I could turn on today off the shelf, and our marketers start making lots of content, but then it gets bottlenecked and it doesn't get to the customers, then then as we fix the bottleneck, they're going to be less inclined to use the AI tools for content. So trying to look at AI tools for MLR. So I think it's really about we got to jump in and we got to use all of these tools, and it's such an exciting time, and other industries are using it. So our HCPs, our patients, they expect a different level of information and communication from us, but we also have to make sure we're setting up internally our users for success so that they stay on the journey with us and that they want to use the technologies as it gets stronger and smarter and faster. So I think it's that balance of maybe pause on the easy thing to turn on if the easy thing turns into a bottleneck later where you create frustration. So I think that's what we're having, that balancing act of we want to be all in, but we want it to be successful. And at the end of the day, we want our HCPs and our patients to get better content. And so just doing it all in the right way takes maybe a little bit more patience than I would like to have.
Yeah, I think that internal piece is really important. And with the way these LLMs are kind of changing that journey, Michelle, is that changing your approach to some of, you mentioned that digital front door, which sounds really cool, but is that changing how you're kind of approaching your websites and some of that digital content as well?
Well, I mean, of course, I think, Mary, maybe just to also echo what you're saying, as I think if we can get our reviews working a little bit faster, just support the team, because most of us are probably not getting more people. We're asking our same reviewers with the same, let's say 3 people reading all this material, and we're going to say we're going to give them more. We have to think differently about how we're going to review all that, I think, and then turn it on. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think for me, it still comes back down to creating information that people want. So, understanding where people are going in search, understanding what our communities are looking for, and also creating content that's not just what we want them to know, but what they want to know for themselves. Maybe an example, if you think about a world with hemophilia, how are we supporting patients when they think about traveling with hemophilia or living their life with hemophilia? They're not just looking for disease information or product information, but really relevant content to them. Because ultimately, if I think about myself, what do I go back to a website for? The information has been refreshed. There's been new content that I'm interested in reading. They understand I want to read more about a specific thing, whatever that hobby or life information might be. So I think that's really critical for us to think about. That is that the resource has to be about what the person wants to read, not just what we think they want.
And that's interesting with the kind of resource, and Levi, you talked about the transparency that people want with use of AI, but that trust, the risk of misinformation and so forth. You add into that the kind of overwhelm, both internally and externally. Like, how do you manage that, and how do we remain that the source, especially pharma? If these LLMs are taking content, how do we remain that source of credible information when other things are taking our content? And Abner, have you got any thoughts there?
You have to be disciplined on the way you approach this. If you make sure that everything modularly makes sense, then you can better articulate things together and in peace too. Essentially, the rules that kind of delineate where and how and to what extent you can go in terms of disseminating information are the same rules everywhere. And if you make sure that you comply with these rules, I mean, being balanced, having all the references there, that the references are really good, that every single piece of information is approved. And when you decided to something that is more relevant, all the other pieces that will balance the information are there, then you can think about going to the next step, which is modular creation of materials that will be more targeted and personalized to the needs of the HCPs and patients. If you don't have this, then you can easily go in the wrong direction, and then will suffer the consequences either by distrust from the clients that you have or the regulatory bodies, whatever you are. So essentially, what I'm saying, or in different words, is that you have to have consistency. And once you get to this consistency and you articulate it well, then the next step is kind of a no-brainer, provided that you continue to monitor this and make sure that the output is continues to be airtight, to in the sense that you are just fulfilling all the requirements necessary.
Yeah, I think that kind of building our content for these different tools that are going to be taken, and I think, like you say, that modular approach is really important. In terms of that sort of misinformation, like Levi, you've worked with influencers before and that kind of thing. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how that has played its role in sort of correcting some of these challenges?
Yeah, I mean, misinformation is out there. I think we talked. Some of the panelists mentioned, the rigor of what we go through in order to produce content, work with physicians to co-create that content. It usually takes a while, and in that time that it takes a while, misinformation is spreading, right? And it's spreading across these multiple channels. And so, I always do see this struggle, this push and pull for myself. It's like the longer it takes us to produce material and produce good quality education, it's probably getting drowned out by all this other stuff that just any random person can generate. I recently just saw a report. Yeah, it was a newsletter from my alma mater, Ohio State, and there was a research team there that looked at misinformation on TikTok, which was related to gynecologic cancer. And what they did was they looked at the top 5 hashtags on the platform. And anybody want to guess on how much misinformation it was on those top 5 hashtags? What percentage? It's 73%. That's almost like so you 25% of the time you might be getting something that was either accurate or good educational quality. And so to really drive this home, and I wish that we could talk to our MLR teams about this, because a couple of years ago they laughed at us when they were like, "Oh, can we do something on TikTok?" Right? Those top 5 hashtags, those posts have 466 million views, and I think that is what we're up against, and we really need to create those as safe spaces to get that information that's out there.
Yeah, and the way these kind of tools are starting to pick up that information, what they're basing it off, the algorithms, it feels like we're going back to those old days of SEO where people are trying to game some of that. Mary, how have you kind of changed your approach, or what are some of the ways that you're trying to use with your teams to get involved in these tools and make sure that your information is surfacing?
Yeah, I do think it is almost getting back to the basics, but with a renewed passion for what can it do? Tagging is so important now. And I think that working in a global role, I see different countries have different opinions on if and how they should tag their content. And I think that, since Google and Bing and all the search engines have been around, tagging has been critical, but now we've entered a new area where taking the time to pause and make sure that you've done the basics of tagging in a correct way. It's going to ensure that we at least maybe compete with some of the misinformation out there by showing up. I mean, where you're as Levi was talking about, there's so much misinformation. We're not gonna squash it, but I think we've got to be really structured and making sure that we've got a taxonomy that works, and then a process for tagging, and it really becomes a part of content creation. So that way we have a fighting chance to show up and make sure that our HCPs and our patients get the right information and are able to navigate through. So for me, it's a renewed focus on the basics of tagging, which we should have been doing all along. But really have a reason to even raise it up more now as to why it's so critical.
Yeah, and I think that transparency, doing the basics, the kind of different channels, and just that idea that we're having to compete against a lot more. The noise is always getting broader and bigger, rather. But it's interesting how those kind of influences will probably play a big role in this moving forward. So we know we're kind of in a transition, and that one size doesn't fit all, and that applies to our audiences as much as it does our kind of regional markets and so forth. But Michelle, if I've seen you speak previously about your kind of vision of CX and those kind of internal and external factors, what are some of the kind of barriers we need to overcome and things that we need to do to sort of push the industry forward? You know, is there a cultural change needed, or what are your thoughts on that?
For sure. I mean, I think, many of us have been going through, I'd say, different cultural changes across the business. All of us, I think, probably going through different reorgs and structures. I think at the end of the day, maybe it comes back to this flexibility and how we think about being nimble and prioritizing the work we do. I think we've been in a traditional structure where we focus about one thing at a time. But if we genuinely take a look at what's going to move the business, I think creating those mini projects, working in an agile way, setting time up, in those 2-week sprints really helps us start to be more nimble about prioritizing the work. And ideally, as we work through some of this, I think being a bit more cross-functional and how we're thinking about where the answers need to come from, that inclusion of medical and market access and, across the countries and kind of de-siloing ourselves only helps us become more customer-centric, as we're trying to be more nimble. Because everything's moving so quickly, I think we have to kind of break down some of that hierarchy that's sitting within our structures.
Yeah, and I think that kind of talks to Abner's point earlier about integration. And as someone
Yes.
in medical, Abner, what are your thoughts on that? And is it something that you share?
You mean in terms of integration?
Yeah, like, is it integrated teams? Is that one of our kind of biggest barriers to producing a better CX for
It
our
can be.
patients? Or
Yeah, it can be. It all depends on the environment that you are. Some companies have a big problem in terms of integrating teams and integrating conversations and all the sorts of problems creating silos and these things. The better organizations are those that respecting compliance and legal limits do the integration in the best way possible. Uh, it is it is not a difficult thing to do, provided that everybody's on the same boat. And if you put the KPIs objectives for all members of different teams in the same direction, and you make sure that you recognize the collaboration efforts. So most of the people tend to collaborate properly. I think that without collaboration, it's no way that you're really going to be successful. Especially because not only medical affairs became more complex with more information available and more data points available, but access is increasingly difficult in every single place in the world. US, you guys know well, but when you think about Europe, there's a big change related to how you start the access process, but at the same time, you start the registration process. Canada, same thing. Australia, same thing. Latin America is getting more and more strong on this sense, not to mention Asia. So if you don't do this well, medical affairs and access, and then marketing, and then regulatory, and then all stakeholders available, what happens is that you keep going in silos, and at the end, it's a recipe for disaster. Either because you're going to launch a product without proper access, or you're not even going to launch the product, or you're going to launch the project with the wrong indication, and then we're going to suffer to get this to patients because access won't be there. So working together is a no-brainer. Now, information is flowing in all these areas that I've just said. So if you don't integrate information, you can integrate people, but people without information, it's just a chit-chat conversation. Then when your systems are integrated enough for these folks to drink at the same fountain, then you extract the best of the value. Every time I see insights reports coming from MSLs, translated into actionable things for other groups in the organization. It makes a lot of sense, not only for me, but for others. And then by doing this, we can inform strategy, but also inform small changes that sometimes are small, sometimes are bigger, on the tactical way that you have to deploy your strategy, and it makes a whole world of difference.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's the first time I've kind of thought of it like this, but CX as a measure of how good your teams are collaborating and how well they're integrated, I think is a really interesting kind of KPI, especially for all those different scenarios you mentioned. Levi, obviously we're agency side, but it's a bit different being on the outside of it. But if there was, in terms of that patient experience, what's kind of one thing we can all do to kind of improve and that you think will have a big impact?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think anything we can do that expands the experience that the patient and physician have during their visit, I think is something we should hone in on. And I think one of the great advancements in the last kind of decade or so is many of the health systems have adopted these patient portals, and so now patients and physicians can interact with each other in these asynchronous messages, and have that information exchange that can happen. So expanding that visit, I think that's super critical. And when I think about it, I think about safe spaces to be to get information, and obviously that patient portal is one of the safest spaces. And so I think it's up to us to help generate more safe spaces to receive and share information. So I guess again, to circle back to your question, one thing I would do is continue to look at those safe spaces to develop content and co-create content with physicians to combat all that misinformation that I talked about earlier.
Yeah, and Mary, if I can come to you just as a final, with those different elements that we've kind of discussed, again, in terms of that customer experience and keeping organizations improving and so forth, what do you think is kind of needed to make them happen?
I think you got to just jump. You got to take a leap of faith, and you got to get in and be curious and messy and play around with it all. I think that we have enough structure within pharma that sometimes we're afraid to kind of just like play, and I think that we're in an area now where you just like jump in, like take a leap of faith, like just know that if you're clear on who you want to talk to, you're clear on the messages that matter to them, you're using your data, probably not going to get it wrong. And you're probably going to find some efficiencies. You're going to find different levels of impact. And so I think that's what I really encourage everyone in our organization is be curious, play, try. Like let's, we don't get this many opportunities where something really big and bold is introduced into the universe. This isn't even about pharma. And so like grab onto it and have fun with it and know that it's not going to be perfect on day one. That's all right. It's okay. So I think that's my biggest thing is be curious, have fun, and just get going. Just get going.
Love that. And yeah, I think that it's not just those metrics, it's not just personalization, it's not just engagement, it's how we're moving people along, we're getting them to move along their journey, and that next best action I think was a really big part. The other things I think listening to you guys is that AI and digital transformation is changing those pathways, the trust and touch points, and we have to couple that with I think the audience's preferences changes and so forth. And a lot of what we will do in the future is going to need that bold collaboration, like you say, that integrated thinking, and complex problems need to be solved together. So today's like really reinforced that kind of mosaic aspect of the culture of the customer experience. Lots of little pieces really add up. What we do digitally, at the Congress, face to face, and how we take those insights, tech, collaboration, and that occasional leap of faith, like you say it, all that effort and those pieces are going to remove that frustration, remove that friction, and make for a great customer experience. So I think we'll end it there. Thank you so much to the panelists, and really appreciate your thoughts and your kind of wisdom on this topic. Feel free to send any further questions. We'll try and kind of respond to some of those. And also do reach out to us on LinkedIn. All of us kind of love talking about this, so we'd definitely welcome another chance to kind of chat about this. The webinar will be available on demand and on the Reuters page. So thanks very much. Appreciate all that, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
everybody.
you,
Thanks so
Dimitri.
much.